Hello, Dr. Mike and all of my friends. My name is Mufea and I am from Sedi College, Kota Damansara. And today I'm going to present about the current job prospects for forensic psychologists here in Malaysia. So, as we all know, forensic psychology is not fully fledged in Malaysia, and there's no one body that has the forensic psychologist license under them, unlike the US. Um, but however, there are three main professions which they carry out the job of a forensic psychologist. The three of them are prison counselor, criminologist, and also clinical psychologist. So today I'm going to present about the job scopes of the three main jobs that are kind of an alternative to a forensic psychologist in Malaysia. So first, when we look at prison counselors and the jobs they do, in Malaysia, they provide services to the prisoners and also to the staff of the prison. The counselors provide psychological support for both inmates and the staff, and also cater to their spiritual or religious needs. And they have intervention programs for the inmates and also rehabilitation programs as well. They conduct religious workshops and forums in addition to psychological rehabilitation programs and intervention programs. They provide these for both inmates and the staff of the prison. The next profession I'm going to talk about is a criminologist. So in Malaysia, based on the research I've done, the criminologists in Malaysia, they do give crime prevention training to the community, as in the local, and also to the police officers, so that they can also in turn give training to the community as well. And for the second point, they do investigation. A really mainstream focus of Malaysia is economic crime, meaning crimes such as abuse of power, also corruption, and a lot of things like that, which come up as a result of the modern economic advances. Also, this also includes fraud on company levels. So when these investigators also give awareness to companies that are sometimes oblivious to the things that are happening, which ends up in corruption or fraud, which they're not aware of. The third one is research. Criminologists in Malaysia do a lot of do research. I did one. There was a researcher who conducted a research on finding the root causes of crime in Malaysia. So there have been research done by criminologists in Malaysia. And then the next one is examination. This means when a crime occurs, they do examine the crime scene or the whole crime. They're involved in the examination of the crime. And according to forensic psychologists in Malaysia, since there is no separate forensic psychologist department in Malaysia, they do believe that a lot more specialists are needed, like not only forensic psychologists, but also a pathologist or analyst for forensic problems. So there is a huge need of more specialists in the forensic psychology of Malaysia. Next, I'm going to talk about clinical psychologists. This is going to be the clinical psychologists who work with inmates in prisons. Mm, in general, they give support, advice, and also therapy to the prisoners. And it is noted that some prisoners are non-verbal, and so with the psychological therapies, they're able to get them out of the very depressive states, and which in turn helps create a higher quality of life for the prisoners. So these psychological therapy programs really help them give the inmates a better life. And they also conduct psychology-based recovery programs, which they mainly use art therapy. So they use things like painting, music, and weaving, so that the prisoners have a chance to um, show their creativity and also help them with their mental issues. So um, even exhibitions have been held where the prisoners' art were exhibited. So it was recorded that this is a very helpful recovery program for the inmates. And there have also been more than 100 counselors or clinical psychologists who have worked in prisons with the inmate since 2011. But then in 2019, it was announced that that was not enough and the system needs more of them because there are thousands of inmates who need help. So that is all for my part. And thank you, and I hope you learned something from our presentation.
Hi, my name is Liz Brown, and I'll be going over the current job prospects in forensic psychology in the United States. The first question people might ask is there a high demand in this field? There is. Being such a young field, only coming in at around 1962, it is growing rapidly. People may ask, is there money to be made in this field? Of course, pay depends on the education that is achieved, what capacity you plan on working in. Examples would be private to correctional, and where you plan on working, because big metropolitan cities seem to help forensic psychologists thrive. Since we're working with a great group from Malaysia, let's look at the differences in pay between forensic psychologists in Malaysia and in the United States. In Malaysia, the base pay with a master's is RM 36444, and at the senior level, it is RM 57800. At the base level for a master's in the United States, it's 33,000. At the doctoral level in the United States, the salary is 60,000 to well over 300,000. Before we jump into the jobs, I wanted to review what I learned in this project. I was very excited to see all the opportunities for forensic psychology, even at the master's level. Another interesting thing was how young this field is. I also thought it was interesting that you could even get jobs with a bachelor's degree. However, they're a lot harder to find than the master's and doctorate levels. I'm excited to review these jobs with you, so let's jump right in. The first job we'll explore is jury consultant. For this job, a minimum of a master's will be required. These experts work with lawyers to try to find the jury that is best fit for the case. This consultant would work with a lawyer to come up with different approaches that would help the jury's understanding of the message the attorneys are trying to convey. Courses needed for this degree might include classes in courtroom dynamics, and jury selection. In being experts on human behavior, the attorneys rely on the jury consultants for strategies on making the case go the way it can be most successful. Let's move on to a correctional counselor. Correctional counselors focus on leading the criminal into a smooth transition from a criminal mindset to a life without crime. They come up with a plan to keep the criminal successful in society while also helping them with techniques on how not to reoffend. With working with inmates in correctional facilities, a master's degree would be the minimum requirement. Overall, the correctional counselor will help the client with their overall well-being in an attempt to correct criminal tendencies. Now let's look at the criminal profiler. A criminal profiler are profilers trying to get a psychological identity for a criminal. A bachelor's degree is accepted, however, higher education is recommended, and it might be recommended by the employer. As with other jobs in this field, a solid foundation on human behavior and characteristics is required. Criminal profilers will be hands-on on crime scenes, identifying and analyzing evidence carefully and keeping well-documented detailed reports to provide assistance in court cases. Moving on to the correctional psychologist. To be a successful correctional psychologist, a master's degree would be the minimum education. A correctional psychologist is interested in the transition of the criminal into society while focusing on the offender's mental health. To evaluate and set up treatment for the offender, a doctor's degree would be required. Correctional psychologists know the impact that prison can have on a person and are diligent in being understanding and compassionate to this for the transitioning offender. Ultimately, these professionals are looking to provide safety and support to their clients. Next, we look at the forensic psychologist. This job also calls for a minimum of a master's degree. In being a forensic psychologist, there are times in which there will be a need to testify in court as an expert witness. Although it's not easy to get on the stand, these professionals can make a big difference in the life of a person, good and bad. Forensic psychologists not only want to know why the criminal committed the offense, but how to avoid the same results in the future. They can even often tell the courts in expert testimony why the crime was ever committed. Criminal behavior is analyzed and studied to not only try to find the criminal, but also it's instrumental in finding the motive for the crime many times. Okay, finally we move on to the forensic psychology researcher. A master's degree, again, would be the minimum requirement for this job. The forensic psychology researcher is researching data and trends. This expert will be able to analyze data and trends in a clinical and prison setting. The main goal is to find different ways to explore and implement research advancements in the psychological research field. Not only would they work to include treatment techniques used on criminals for successful practices in the legal system, but also ultimately help the criminal. Skills for this position would include critical thinking and strategizing. Research is a must, and problem solving. Now, let's transition to a video from an expert in forensic psychology.
Hello, I'm Sheridan Hughes. I'm a career consultant with Career Analysts. I'm going to talk to you today about how to get into various careers. Forensic psychologists are psychologists who are particularly concerned with the criminal mind and with understanding how deviants work. It's one of the fastest growing fields of psychology. I think it's not exactly what one thinks of in the sense that, we all have in our mind the books by Paul Britton and who supposedly the inspiration for Cracker. And he is, obviously tracking criminals and profiling criminals. Now, there certainly is an element of criminal profiling in forensic psychology. They do look at research and take from that research what they can to identify the sort of people who are likely to have perpetrated certain crimes. So they're using statistical evidence and research to inform their advice. But a lot of it is also about being able to build relationships with quite strange people. So you'll be working with the police, with the health services, and in prisons with people, trying to help them to understand their behaviour and understand the implications of their behaviour on victims. Before entry, you would actually need to have done a full psychology degree followed by forensic psychology masters, and that would take obviously a 3-year degree and then at least 2 years with the masters, and then you would have to follow a programme of relevant experience in order to be accredited by the Health Council. So it's quite a long-term course, and it is something which you can't do without a degree. You would, again, being a sensitive area, it's not always easy to be working in prisons, but obviously there are things like various youth deviancy organisations, and being able to work with young people, with mentally ill people, with victim support would be a very useful experience, and in fact a required experience before being able to secure a place in such a responsible role. Obviously, in terms of qualities, you need to be able to build empathy and understanding with people who aren't always, well, very unlikely to be run-of-the-mill, perhaps, serial killers and really quite evil people. And therefore, also, you have to be prepared to be in perhaps some danger, perhaps, when you are actually dealing with these kinds of people. And often it's a field which is quite difficult to make a difference, but obviously any differences you do make are going to be very rewarding. That's the experience and qualifications which you would need to become a forensic psychologist.